Hello, hello, welcome. Just want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon. We're going to give a few minutes to allow other folks to join. Thank you so much for being here and joining us this afternoon. Really excited to have you a part of this conversation. Hello, hello, welcome to those who are just joining. We'll be getting started in about 60 seconds, just allowing other folks to join us this afternoon. Really excited to have you here. Thank you for joining. All right, out of respect for your time, we're gonna go ahead and kick off here. Hello to those that are joining us. So excited to have you here for this conversation, and we just appreciate you taking the time. Today's national webinar is hosted by the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign and is focused on our state action guide that supports state level officials in building stronger schools through educator diversity. We are extremely grateful that each of you made the choice to be here for today's important conversation, especially during a very complex time in our sector. Please know that our campaign remains steadfast in our values and efforts to help you continue to serve your students, educators, and community more equitably. As we go through today's content, our team will post important links in the chat to resources that we hope will help support the discussion and your work. This session is also recorded, and it'll be uploaded to the campaign's YouTube channel for your convenience for you to come back to. If this is your first time with us today, just want to note that the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign seeks to grow the ranks of our nation's teachers of color by 1 million and leaders of color by 30,000 over the next decade through a broad cross-sector coalition to advocate for change at every level of the system. And to achieve our goal, the campaign uses 3 interconnected strategies that guide all our initiatives. First, we're building a national narrative around the importance and urgency of educator diversity, raising awareness through research, stories, and public engagement. We're also creating a network of aligned champions and sharing best practices that can be implemented across states and districts. And finally, we're really working to advocate for policy changes and pushing for robust policy implementation to dismantle barriers and support diverse pathways into the teaching profession. Together, all these strategies drive a unified movement to reimagine what the future of education can look like. The backbone of our campaign is our dedicated steering committee, which provides direction, insight, and leadership for achieving our mission. Our committee is comprised of experts, policymakers, and educators from across 8 organizations. And this committee of champions really elevate educator diversity and ensures that our work remains impactful and relevant. This guidance has helped us create a strategic framework that is both ambitious and grounded, driving us toward our goals while aligning with federal, state, and local education priorities. We're deeply grateful for our steering committee's contributions and leadership. So over the next hour, we plan to share best practices from the campaign's newest state action guide, which will lead us to a compelling discussion with our dynamic panel. During the conversation, we encourage you to take note of any questions you have, as we'll have an interactive Q&A session with the audience and with our panelists. Before the panel, I want to take a moment to lay the foundation and share more about this resource. So the Campaign State Action Guide is a foundational resource that we've developed to support leaders in strengthening educator diversity in their states. This guide equips state officials, chief school officers, governors, legislators, and education agency leaders with concrete actions to address systemic barriers and accelerate workforce diversity efforts. We also are going to drop a link in the chat to the full guide in case you're interested in looking at this more closely. So the campaign identified a set of policy levers and recommendations that we believe state officials can implement to increase the representation of teachers and school leaders of color in their respective states and improve the academic, economic, and social outcomes for every student across their states as well. The first lever in our state action guide is setting clear, measurable goals for increasing teacher and leader diversity, complete with timelines. We know that publicly shared goals create transparency, accountability, and most importantly, measurable progress. One notable example from our guide is from Mississippi's Department of Education. They've pledged to increase minority teacher representation in high-need districts by 25% by the end of 2025. And we believe that this is a good example of what we mean by setting specific goals. By setting these specific goals, it allows states to be more effective in engaging their communities and holding systems accountable, which again helps pave the way for lasting change in our educator workforce. Next, we encourage states to establish transparent and accessible data systems to track and report on diversity within the workforce. Data transparency is essential for identifying gaps, successes, and really helping to create informed decision-making. Nebraska, for example, they produce an annual teacher vacancy report that provides insights across all their districts. By making this information public and transparent, it really empowers states to hold these systems accountable and guide interventions where they're needed most, and also empower their communities. Another crucial component of our guide is the support for quality teacher and leader preparation programs that recruit and prepare educators of color. So programs like Grow Your Own and teacher residencies offer powerful models for drawing talent from within your unique communities. For instance, Tennessee has even pioneered the first teacher apprenticeship program, creating a sustainable pathway for educators. We know that these programs not only increase the diversity of the educator workforce, but also build educators' commitment to their local communities as well. Our fourth lever is to reform licensing regulations and establish financial supports that reduce barriers to entry for educators of color. This includes scholarship programs, loan forgiveness, and apprenticeship programs to assist with certification costs. For instance, Colorado's Senate bill provides loan repayment assistance to educators in rural and high-needs areas. By reducing financial and regulatory barriers, states can broaden access to teaching and support a more diverse and equitable workforce. Career pathways and fair compensation are also essential for retaining talented educators of color. So by creating professional growth opportunities such as leadership roles for teachers, stipends for bilingual staff, and innovative layoff policies, states can really enhance job satisfaction and retention. Ohio's Teacher Leader Toolkit actually provides districts with models for supporting teacher leaders. These supports not only help retain teachers of color, but it also recognizes and elevates their contributions within their individual schools. And lastly, retention is the final but notably one of the most important levers of our action guide. Evidence-based retention programming such as mentoring, induction, and affinity groups can support a supportive environment for teachers and leaders of color. Illinois has implemented a community of practice that's focused on blending funding streams to support their diversity goals and really creating a cohesive statewide system of support for educators. By providing structured support, it helps reduce turnover and empowers educators of color to thrive within their context. With that, we're really honored to host a panel discussion with our distinguished leaders from various states who are doing phenomenal work across these policy levers. Our panelists bring expertise from diverse roles and states, offering unique perspectives on implementing policies that advance educator diversity. So we'll hear more about their experiences, challenges, and successes in navigating policy changes to support a more inclusive educator workforce. With that, it is my pleasure to pass the mic to Representative Manny Cruz, who will moderate today's discussion. Manny currently serves as an advocacy director for Latinos for Education and a state representative in Massachusetts. It's an honor to have him here with us, as well as all of our distinguished panelists. Over to you, Manny. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tomlinson. It is such an honor to be able to share this space with you. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to moderate this incredibly dynamic panel. By way of introduction, my name is Manny Cruz, and I proudly serve as a senior policy fellow at Latinos for Education. And I am also have the privilege of serving my community as a state representative, and then also as the vice chair of the Salem School Committee. But first and foremost, I'm a proud product of our Salem Public Schools. And I remember the magic of having three educators of color, Senora Lopez, Senora Garcia, Senora Cole, all who affirmed my language, my upbringing, and built deep connections with me as a student and inspired me to pursue excellence. And I'm forever grateful for them. And that's the experience that I want for all of our students. And I just want to note before we dive into this panel that we are coming off of an election. And if I could just briefly, share with folks, our work is around educator diversification, reaching 1 million teachers of color, 30,000 educational leaders of color. I understand that there's a lot of different sentiments about what will happen with work like this. And what I will say to folks is that we have been here before with respect to civil rights and representation being a question mark in our country. And what I've always found is that the resilience of the American people shines through. And if this is a priority for us and we're able to stick to our values, what we have found in our work collectively is that there is bipartisan support for building an educator workforce that reflects our communities and our values, and that we need to stick to those principles. So with that, I'm incredibly excited to be able to moderate a panel of individuals who are leading in education across the country. So today we are joined by three dynamic education policymakers. I'll give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves, but for the edification of all the folks listening at home, I'm going to ask first, I'm going to introduce Claire Abbott, who serves as the director of the Office of Educator Effectiveness at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a colleague and a counterpart. Thank you, Claire, for being with us. We are also joined today by State Representative Ray Moore, who represents the 8th District in the House of Representatives in Delaware, someone I'm hoping to get to know more today and has some similar lived experience to myself. Thank you for your service, Representative Moore. And then we're also joined by Dr. Tucker, who's the Chief Talent Officer for the Connecticut State Department of Education. And they have really impressive bios, and I, quite frankly, can't do it justice by just reading it off paper. So to that end, I'd love to ask each of our panelists if they could briefly share a bit of an introduction, their personal pathway to state leadership, and why educator diversity is important to you. And I want to first begin with Dr. Tucker.
First and foremost, thank you all for the opportunity to be present today on this webinar. I am Shawana Tucker. I am the Chief Talent Officer here in the state of Connecticut. I began my career about 25 years ago at the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C., fresh out of graduate school, and it was a wonderful experience. I've also worked in the private sector, education policy focused in the Washington, D.C. area, and then I transitioned to Connecticut. While here in Connecticut for the past 20 years, I have had the privilege and opportunity to work in 4 urban school districts. I've worked at the University of Connecticut in the Educational Leadership Department and also served as the director of the UCAP program, which is an administrative preparation program at UConn. And I would say that in most of these positions, I was the only person of color at the table, whether it was higher ed during that time or a district cabinet member. And I noticed that our student demographic in Connecticut was constantly changing. And I just see that there is a missed opportunity for identifying and tapping resources so that our field could diversify and the need to diversify from students entering the profession. And so I want to see our students enter the profession. I want to see them advance themselves, whether it's teaching or administration, into other positions. And I'm a firm believer that our voices are needed at the table. So in all of the work that I do currently in Connecticut, I always want to hear the voices of not just my students, but also those that are currently in the field, as well as those of our partners. And I take all of those voices into consideration as I develop initiatives to move our agenda forward. So thank you for having me.
And thank you, Dr. Tucker, for your commitment to our students and the educators that serve them. And next, I'd like to invite Representative Moore.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to have me to serve as a panelist today. I am State Representative Sheree Ray Moore, serving humbly and proudly the 8th District, which is Middletown, Delaware. Much like, Representative Cruz said, I'm an educator, and I do believe that representation matters. That's why I still show up in a classroom. As you see, I'm still here as well. I do believe that we have to continue to address measures and keep on expanding and advocating to make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that teachers of color, minority teachers are in the classroom, because, the children needs it. So I'm very excited to have a robust conversation about the things that we are doing here in the state of Delaware to make sure that we have supporting the initiatives of supporting teachers of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Moore, and appreciate your commitment to our children and being in the trenches doing this policy work. I know it's not easy, but they're lucky to have you in Delaware serving with your vast experience as an educator. Super important. And with that, my friend, my neighbor, Claire Abbott, please take the stage.
Thanks, Manny. And I also want to share my appreciation for just being invited to join this prestigious panel today and talk about such an important topic. I really appreciated the question too about our personal pathways to state leadership. I've frankly never been asked that, so I had to pause and do some reflection, which was really helpful. And it brought me all the way back to when I was in public school, in elementary and middle school in West Hartford, Connecticut, which was an upper middle class white suburb just outside Hartford. And it was right in the midst of one of the longest acting school desegregation cases, Sheff versus O'Neill. And I was literally surrounded by lawn signs, protests, all the heated dinner conversations. And it really had a formative impact on my own understanding of equity in general, but really specifically the role that public education plays as a determinant in people's lives. And that sort of set me on the path to education. Initially, I studied education law and research, thinking I wanted to go right into school desegregation and really spent a lot of time studying related zoning policies, only to be told that these policies were no longer viable or valuable, which felt very frustrating to me. And when I joined the Department of Education in Massachusetts 13 years ago, I actually came on board to oversee the research practice partnerships that we were able to put in place through the Race to the Top grant. And I was pulled into the policy side of a lot of these debates, which was really where I found myself the most sort of energized. And since then, I'm proud to say that I now reside over one of the most robust research portfolios in the department, focused explicitly not just on educator effectiveness, but on workforce diversity as an explicit goal of ours. And we really work hard to ensure that all of our state actions and decisions related to educator diversity are grounded in a deep evidence base. So that's how I got to where I am, and I couldn't be more proud of the work we do. I love doing it every day and excited to launch this conversation.
Well, thank you, Claire, for your service to the residents of the Commonwealth. It's been a pleasure to collaborate with you over the years on accelerating the diversification of our educator workforce. And each of you had such unique pathways to becoming educators and education policymakers. And Let that be a lesson to any students or educators that are listening in today, that as we think about the different ways and that we try to get our students to enter into the educator workforce, we can tell them our unique pathways, our stories, and that can be an entry point to exploration and curiosity about how students may see themselves as educators and educator reformers. So to that end, we have this dynamic and distinguished panel, and I want to be able to get right into the conversation. So I'm going to turn to our first panelist question, which I'm going to direct to you, Dr. Tucker. So Dr. Tucker, from your experience as the Chief Talent Officer in the state of Connecticut, you have this tremendous wealth of experience in developing close partnerships with schools, family, and community partners whose input and buy-in is critical to the success of a state addressing all of its talent strategies. Can you just share briefly with our audience about the state of Connecticut's commitment in setting clear goals and timelines to increase educator diversity within the teaching workforce and the leader workforce, and how it included meaningful stakeholder feedback in the process?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll start with our State Board of Education recently updated their 5-year strategic plan. In the first plan from 5 years ago previously, and the current plan, one of the goals within the plan is diversification of the educator workforce. So for us, this is very important that our state board has identified educator diversity as a priority for our state. And I have worked in my 4.5 years here at the State Department to develop initiatives specifically around this goal. For example, in our previous plan, we started with 7% educators of color in Connecticut. At the end of that 5-year plan, that number had increased to 11.7%. So we made progress, but at the same time, we also realized that there's a lot more work to be done. In this plan, we didn't put a specific number, but we want to really move from 11.7, and we're now targeting within the next 5 years, we're trying to get to 15 or 16% internally. That's what the goal that we've set for ourselves. I want to say that it is noteworthy to mention that several of our initiatives that are assisting us with expansion know that our partners play a critical role for us to move the needle forward. We have created the Connecticut, what we call the Connecticut 616 Educator Pipeline Pathway. And along this pathway, it began starting in middle school with Grow Your Own programs such as Educators Rising. We also have programs and support to assist our students from middle school now all the way through college graduation and job placement. So that's part of the pathway that we have developed. This includes dual credit education courses at the high school level that are now transferable to community college, as well as into the EPP program. So we have a regulation that will be coming off the books in 2026. It used to limit only 2 education courses. We've pushed for 3, and we're trying to have it eliminated in 25 as opposed to 26, where students can take up to 3 courses for 9 credit hours of education courses to transfer either to community college or into the EPP. And I might note that we've worked for the past 2 years very closely with our higher ed, the Connecticut State College and University system, to develop another pathway. Community college only used to offer an associate's degree in early childhood. I talked to my colleagues there, so you're missing out on a whole lot of folks because students in Connecticut can go to community college for free. And so we know that a lot of our students go through the community college system for 2 years, take their core courses, and then they transfer into an EPP. But previously, not all of the courses were transferable. So we've worked very, very hard to ensure that it is a smooth, streamlined process and that students do not have to take the same courses over and over again. So that's just one example of dual credit. Also, from Educators Rising, which offers a lot of support, and we now have over 28 districts participating and over 500 students in our Ed Rising program. We've partnered with CEA, and CEA runs the Aspiring Educators program on our college campuses. So it's a seamless transition for our students to still receive the support and the resources that they need. we now offer an Aspiring Educators Diversity Scholarship that is $10,000 per year. So if you are a graduate of an Alliance School District and you want to become an educator and you enroll in an EPP within our state, you can receive $10,000 per year to cover your college tuition. It also applies to graduate students as well. And once you're in college, we have the Next Gen program, which you can start gaining experience sophomore year working in a school district for 2.5 days per week, being paid the sub rate, and that then transfers into our apprenticeship program, which we developed this year. And within the apprenticeship program, we have funds allotted. And as a student, you are earning $10,000 for your student teaching. We also pay a portion of the mentor stipend. And we also provide fees to cover the cost of certification. So in doing all of this, we have numerous partners, from our districts to our educational preparation programs to our higher education system. We've also worked very closely with the unions and other organizations here in the state, such as CALUS, which focuses on our Latino administrators, and BLACK, which focuses on our Black administrators here within the state of Connecticut. And I will say that working closely and sharing our story with our legislators who truly understand where we are and how we're trying to move the needle, that has truly helped us, because in the past 2 years, they have now started to put funds behind the initiatives and the programs that we are promoting. And most importantly, 2 things that come from this. One, we now have legislation where each and every district in the state of Connecticut must submit a diversity plan. It was on the books previously, but there was no accountability to it. So they added teeth to that legislation. So each district submits that plan to review for us here at the State Department, where we provide feedback to them. And yes, there are still some districts in the state of Connecticut that do not have one person of color working in those districts. So we will now be moving to Phase B to work with them. And we collect data. We have our EdSite Diversity Dashboard, which was launched in January of 2024. Check it out. It's wonderful because it gives you the whole picture of each and every district in the state, all of the demographics of the students and the employees. So it's a wonderful tool and way for us to track our progress.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tucker, for sharing your perspective. I've got a little bit of goosebumps because here in the Commonwealth, we're about 48 hours away from being in the same situation that you all are in as a state by passing a comprehensive piece of legislation called the Educator Diversity Act. And as you were talking about the ways in which in your role you've engaged with stakeholders, I can't help but think about the great relationship that we've been able to have both in my legislator hat, previously in my role at Latinos for Education, as we were engaging with the department and building a coalition. That two-way dialogue where you could discuss the issues, create consensus, and try to create coherence was super important. And I heard those common threads all throughout your response to the question. So it gives me hope that we're on the right path here in the Commonwealth, and so thrilled that you all have clear goals and that you're reevaluating those and even have some interim goals that you've put into place. So it sounds like from a governance standpoint, from the administration, from how the coalitions have been built, there's been a lot of coherence within the system. So to that end, I do want to turn to our next panelist and pose a question to her, Representative Moore. So you've been a local educator, you're a state legislator, and served as the vice chair of the House Education Committee. So you've seen the importance firsthand of having information that is publicly accessible and easy to navigate for stakeholders in the state of Delaware so that they can understand the extent of public policy issues and what's being done to address any issues. Could you share a little bit more briefly about the state of Delaware's efforts to collect and report comprehensive data related to educator and leader diversity in a way that's visible and actionable to the public?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. One thing I'm humbly able to say is that the state of Delaware is committed to transparency, which through 2 initiatives as we're reporting teacher and leader diversity. The first way that we report is the Excellent Educators Report, which is published annually. It provides data on school district recruitment and their hiring practices, and including also a lot add to what, Dr. Tucker said that the state of Connecticut is doing, we're starting to adopt those measures as far as how to improve teacher diversity in the school district, especially in high needs areas. So like we have different, Delaware's uniquely made up differently. We have an urban setting and we have a rural setting, and those are our high need areas here in the state of Delaware. Another thing that Delaware has done additionally is the Educator Preparation Program, the EPP. And then we also have scorecards that are released every 2 years. So those scorecards are for data on how well the teacher preparation programs are doing, and especially how are we doing when we are trying to recruit to increase teacher diversity, and what are their efforts to making sure they're going to go get those candidates. So I know that a lot of the school district partners with local HBCUs. So we have the HBCU, Delaware State University, which I'm a proud graduate of. We also have a lot of local HBCUs in the tri-state area. So we're very closely with Pennsylvania and Maryland as well. And I do believe that I've heard recruiting efforts as far as Virginia as well to those HBCUs and offering opportunity to work here in the state of Delaware. Both reports are publicly accessible, and they provide actionary insights for policymakers to take a next step and for educators of how we address our diversity challenges and improve the educator workforce.
Well, thank you so much, Rep. Moore, and appreciate the understanding of how important that level of transparency is as we're making these policy decisions. Data is a critical component, but also reporting back on how you're doing with the implementation is super, super critical. So as I think about the work of our campaign, this idea of using scorecards to be able to evaluate shifts that are happening in EPP, so important. So really appreciate you uplifting those specific examples of the ways in which you're not only looking at like the data count with respect to how we're doing on recruitment, retention, but also diving deeper, and the frequency in which you are all examining the data is going to lead to your ability to be able to tweak policy as needed. So thank you for that. And to that end, I'll move to our next panelist, and Ms. Abbott, both in your role as the director of the Office of Educator Effectiveness and in your prior leadership positions, I know firsthand that you've seen the importance of a state's role in adopting robust standards for educator preparation programs to address talent needs and to strengthen educator diversity recruitment efforts. Could you share just some examples of high quality educator preparation programs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that focus on educators of color?
Absolutely. And you mentioned two key points in your question, Manny. First is the role of state standards in promoting educator diversity. And second is the importance of recruitment as part of educator preparation providers. And in our work, they're very intertwined. And as a state agency, we try to be really intentional in addressing both within our own locus of control as an SEA. So I'm going to address both. With regard to standards, we actually started the process of re-examining our own definition of what an effective educator was back in 2020. And we launched a 3-year research study, back to my research focus, on the types of teachers and the types of skills that had positive outcomes with students, both test-based outcomes like standardized tests, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, non-test-based outcomes, particularly with students of color. And not surprisingly, we started to find things like relationship building, cultural competence, high expectations. These were all incredibly important when it came to making a difference with these outcomes for students of color. We then set about updating our standards and our rubrics for both teacher evaluation and teacher preparation. So we also looked at our guidelines for our teacher preparation programs. And we redefined what we meant by effective educators as those who do the following. And I'm going to quote directly from our guidelines and our rubrics now. Those who use evidence-based practices, including anti-racist and culturally and linguistically sustaining practices to nurture and cultivate academic achievement, cultural and linguistic competence, sociopolitical awareness, and emotional intelligence. And these definitions were not only grounded in what we learned from that research study I mentioned, but also in the seminal work of scholars and practitioners like Zaretta Hammond, Geneva Gay, Gloria Ladson-Billings, among others. And we now have standards in Massachusetts for both our in-service teachers and our aspiring teachers in our educator preparation programs that are grounded in these principles of evidence-based, culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. They are in our teacher evaluation rubrics now, and they are in our statewide performance assessments for all teacher licensure candidates. So it's an expectation for our teacher preparation programs, but that coherence into in-service teachers is really intentional and really clear. The other side of the equation is the recruitment, which you mentioned. And we know that teacher preparation providers are essential here as well. In Massachusetts, our educator preparation providers are required to examine their own admissions and advisory policies for both implicit and explicit bias, and they're required to demonstrate a commitment to hiring and supporting a diverse and representative faculty who cultivate an inclusive and supportive learning environment for all candidates. Some programs are further along this journey than others, but we have these shared expectations now, and we're hopeful that our ed prep programs will play an increasingly central role in our commitment to expanding and diversifying the educator workforce. So those are just a couple of the ways in which we've approached this commitment to expanding and diversifying a really effective educator workforce here in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you so much, Claire, for giving us that overview about how we've been approaching this in the Commonwealth. And I do have a follow-up question for you, because as you were talking about how we set standards and the research that's gone into that, and then additionally talking about the expectations around how we're working with our educator preparation programs to ensure that we're bringing down any of the barriers to entry that might exist. That's a lot of work that you're doing as the Department of Education. And I think the other side of that is that there's also the constraints that you have with respect to what the statutes say you're allowed to do. So my follow-up question to you is about state policymakers and the impact that they can have on folks entering into the profession by carefully reviewing the existing licensure requirements and then assessing, whether they're supported by evidence and are correlated with teacher success on the job. So in your view, what steps has Massachusetts taken to reform licensure regulations and made education a more accessible career pathway for people of color?
Yeah, that access is key. We can't cultivate these effective educators unless we can bring them in. So there are two key initiatives on the licensure side right now that I'd point to, both of which are actually referenced in some of the pending legislation you mentioned a few moments ago, Manny. The first is our MTEL alternatives pilot. So this is a 5-year pilot of alternatives to the Massachusetts test for educator licensure, the goal of which is to expand access to the profession by identifying alternative, more authentic ways to assess a prospective educator's content knowledge and communications and literacy skills in a way that also maintains the high standards for our profession. We're coming up on the 5th and final year of this pilot, and we're seeing greater numbers of aspiring teachers of color accessing and passing these alternatives, which is really exciting. This coming February, we will be making a formal proposal to the Board of Education around whether to make many of these alternatives permanent. And this is just, I think, one of the most exciting investments in kind of licensure reform that we're currently operating. The second key initiative that I want to mention is the recent launch of Massachusetts Registered Teacher Apprenticeship Program. So I'm looking to our friends in Connecticut for some good feedback here. This program is explicitly designed to help diversify the workforce by creating a pathway to licensure that is job embedded and comes at little to no cost to participants. It's also similarly designed around grow your own programs that already draw from local communities. We know that in the last 10 years, only one community in Massachusetts did not become more diverse. I mean, it is our local communities that we need to really cultivate and bring into the workforce. So this program will be prioritizing districts with some of those larger gaps in the student and teacher demographics in an effort to really accelerate diversification in our most racially and ethnically diverse communities. So that's the second big investment, I think, on the licensure side that we're excited to be launching right now.
Well, thank you, Claire, and thank you for indulging my follow-up question. And you knew exactly where I was going with that. And I'll just name from my perspective as a legislator, the work that you all were doing as a department with your research, your willingness to work with CBOs to open up that research so that we could put together research that helped inform the legislative process. I think it's the reason why we've landed at a place where we have a landmark bill that's going to be voted on this week. And it is a direct result of us understanding the learnings that you're all having on the department side about the different pathways that have been set up and then the emerging opportunities. So I did want to make sure that our audience understood how important that was. So if you are in a state Department of Education, that relationship between what you're doing on the regulatory side, the licensure side, it's so important for that to be bridged across to what legislators are doing. So please try to bring my colleagues and legislators from around the country together in that type of way, because it does lead to better policy. And it's a recommendation within the state action guide from our campaign for a reason. So to that end, I do want to be able to come back to Dr. Tucker, because Dr. Tucker, you talked a little bit about this before, but I want to go a little bit deeper around some financial incentives. And so I think from a lot of research that members of our coalition have certainly done, we know that teachers of color overwhelmingly report that financial incentives are a critical strategy for encouraging more young people of color to choose education in the first place and to stay. So what steps has the state of Connecticut taken to provide financial support for aspiring educators of color, and what additional ways have you been working with districts to try to not only increase support, but also direct those financial incentives towards retention?
Sure. And Manny, you hit the nail on the head when you speak about finances. Our goal has been to remove barriers. And when we meet and speak with students and teachers, finance is always at the top of the list. So we offer a variety of financial incentives. We've shared these barriers with our legislators and our education committee members specifically. So not only for new teachers, but for those who are career changers who want to enter the profession, we need to look at what resources financially we can provide. So I mentioned the scholarship, the Aspiring Educators Diversity Scholarship was passed in legislation during 2023. So it started off focusing only on our priority school districts. We went back to the legislature and said, we're missing out on a whole pile of people. We need to make this and expand it to alliance districts, which was done. So that very first semester in fall of 23, we only had 29 scholarship recipients. We expanded to alliance, and I'm pleased to say that this fall, we have had 84 scholarship recipients this fall. Each semester, the number is growing. The word is getting out there to cover those tuition costs for our students. And those are specifically for those that are graduating high school, entering in an EPP, and those that are in the EPP. I have $4 million that's been allocated, and believe me, I want to spend as close to that $4 million as possible. So we're still trying and working hard to get the word out there and to get students to apply for the scholarship. Next, the G4 EPP, that was money that was allotted, $2 million, $1 million per year for our EPPs, where they cover the cost of all of the testing for praxis and other certification tests for students. We have seen positive feedback there where students have taken advantage, because that has removed another financial barrier for our students that have to take those certification tests, foundations of reading, all of the various praxis content. it can add up depending on what your content area is. And we spoke with students and with the EPPs. That was a large barrier. So funds have been put there for the past 2 years to cover those costs for students. We also have the Next Gen and the apprenticeship program, which I spoke about earlier, but I'll just say it's our earn while you learn model. And we have 2 registered apprenticeship programs here in Connecticut. One is a residency model, and the other is a model for those that are enrolled in an EPP. We just launched that in January of 2024. And this year we are now expanding, and I have some ARPA funding, which I am allocating for that expansion in this year of our pilot. We started off working specifically with 2 districts. We had one with the Next Gen model and one utilizing the residency model, with a total of 8 students. We are now expanding, and we are looking to have during this expansion now about 30 apprentices moving into the second year. So we want to take it slow, and we want to be very intentional about how we move this along and how we expand. I have asked for a considerable amount of money in this upcoming session for apprenticeship and to expand apprenticeships for the next 2 years. And so beyond this model that we have currently focusing on teachers, we're also looking to expand to cover paraprofessionals and develop a paraprofessional apprenticeship. We've also received a request for bilingual apprenticeship. So we're really trying to target, and special ed, we're really trying to target our shortage areas as we think about expanding apprenticeship. Also, for those that are in the profession, we have worked with Chesla, and we have a teacher loan subsidy program. So if you are employed in an alliance district, in which we have 36 of them, and you have student loans, we do now offer a loan subsidy program in which you can refinance those student loans at a very, very low rate. And that's something that was done through a passage of a bond here within the state for those who are already in the field. Other things that we are doing that may not have the financial impact or have a price tag attached to it would be enhanced reciprocity. We now have enhanced reciprocity within 23 other states. So if you have a certificate and you're certified in one of those 23 states and you want to come to Connecticut, you receive a like-minded certificate from Connecticut without having to go through all of the hoops and the processes and sending transcripts and this, that, and the other. We are seeing a huge bang for our buck, especially with our reciprocity with Puerto Rico. And many of our districts, our large urban districts, have been able to recruit many teachers from Puerto Rico. And we're also recruiting teachers from other areas such as Jamaica as well. So we really have spent some time focusing there. Bringing those teachers here to Connecticut. Similar to Claire, we worked for the past year, and we had a certification council that was established. It is now legislated this year. We have a newly established certification board. We are going to overhaul our regulations, which have not been touched since 1998. And that is a very huge barrier for us. And so the board will meet this month, their very first meeting, and there is a board clerk assigned to manage the board, and we are really looking forward to the work that will come out of that board with breaking down barriers, because that will, as they do that, that will help to reduce some of the financial barriers that have also been put into place. Futuristic, we have a lot going on. We are looking at, and we've had some conversations with our legislators about having paid student teaching for all of our students, because that's a huge barrier for those that are at that point. And we feel that it's important to support them, because many of the students really can't afford it. They're student teaching, and they're running out of the door from student teaching to get to Starbucks, to get to that part-time job that they have to pay the rent, to put gas in the car, et cetera, et cetera. So we would like to see a standardized amount. We're recommending $10,000 per student for the student teaching. So we will see how much traction we are able to gain during this session. We want to expand the apprenticeship programs, as I've already mentioned. And we're also looking at possibly paying for endorsements in shortage areas for those who are already in the profession, waiving or providing the financial support for cross endorsements, specifically in the areas of STEM and special education.
Well, Dr. Tucker, thank you so much for walking us through those important financial incentives. And I certainly think that the reciprocity piece is a financial incentives. I know my math teachers who were listening were already calculating the amount of time that it takes to get another license if they move to another state. So that is certainly a benefit, and I think a lot to be learned there. So Claire and I were definitely taking copious notes as we try to figure out our own strategies there. So to that end, I do want to move to our last question for the panel for me, and then I'll open it up to live questions from our audience. So in our final 2 minutes here, Rep. Moore, I want to turn to you. I've heard it in my coalition work that teacher retention, the best form of recruitment is retaining the educators that we have now. And as we look at school teacher shortages and higher rates of attrition amongst our educators of color across the country, could you share with our audience more about any programmatic or budgetary investments that the state of Delaware has made to support evidence-based programs for retaining educators of color and leaders of color?
Yes, thank you so much. So Delaware has recognized the critical importance of retaining educators of color and leaders of color. The state has implemented several programmatic and budgetary investments to address this issue. As a teacher of color, this is a high initiative and very important of one that I follow very passionately. So one of the things that we have done is, one, we have created a high needs education loan repayment program. That bill number was HB 346. This program offers loan repayment awards between $1,000 to $2,000 to encourage educators during this work shortage and hard to staff schools as well. We have the emergency certification program, we call it Alternative Routes to Teaching. This program is actually I took advantage of and how I became a classroom teacher as well. This state of Delaware will issue emergency certifications to teachers who have not yet met all of the certification requirements by allowing them to teach outside of their licensure areas for up to 3 years while they meet to get full certification. So that may be additional coursework supported through actually all of our higher institutions have ARTC programs that all focus on the different areas. I know Delaware State just got approved for a special education a certification program. There's University of Wilmington University who specializes in actually SPED masters of certification in the state of Delaware. And then the original program carrier of ARTC was University of Delaware, who has made strides to continue to provide those courses for educators. We also have grow your own programs and pathways. Delaware had passed legislation like HB 332, which creates a state high school teacher academy to help students pursue careers in teaching. This is also, pipelining them to here in Appoquinimink School District. If you're in the teacher pathway, you automatically come back and you are offered a job once you complete your coursework, even through the student teaching program as well. This is the work-based learning, teaching residencies, as well as aiming to connect students directly to educators' careers. Lastly, we also are working on career scholarships. The bill will offer $2,500 scholarship to GAP for Teacher Academy to support students, supplementing funds. Like we had something in state called, if you're graduated from a Delaware high school, you had the opportunity to tap into what we call SEED scholarship, and Delaware State University has its own scholarship for Delaware high school students who graduated from Delaware high schools. It's called the Inspire Scholarship to those individuals who end up attending there. It's also to support their higher education journeys as well.
That is remarkable work that has happened in the great state of Delaware. And thank you, Rep. Moore, for sharing those policy insights and shifts and the intentional work that's happening at the front end of the pipeline to make sure that folks are being supported as they enter into the profession and receiving that coaching, that guidance, that mentorship. And then those, again, additional financial incentives. You've got my brain racking on what more I can be doing heading into next session. And certainly as a campaign, if you take a look at the state action guide, you'd find that a lot of the work around educator retention, we focus on it because we do understand how important that is to the overall recruitment efforts and our goals as a campaign. So to that end, in the few minutes that we have, I'm going to open up, because I don't see any questions yet in the chat. I'm going to use some teacher time to let y'all go into the chat. We have these dynamic panelists who are here to answer questions, and perhaps I can take one from the audience. And then if not, I like any good educator, have a couple in my back pocket that I can use. So I'm going to give some teacher time. And as you can see behind me, I've got all 50 states here. So, if folks have questions from any part of our country, we're willing to take you on. So, okay, that's my teacher time. I've given you all some time to put into the chat. I haven't seen any takers. So here's my question in the final few minutes that we had. So in 60 seconds or less, what's one piece of advice that you would offer to a state official, could be someone working in the Department of Education, a legislator, that wants to make progress in this area of diversifying our educator workforce, sustaining it, retaining them, growing them, but is working in a difficult political environment? And yeah, what advice would you offer to them right now about this work? 60 seconds or less.
I would say that to really move the needle forward, relationships are critical. You cannot do it alone. So I cannot do this alone here at the state. I have to have my partners, and we all have to be on the same page, moving in the same direction if we want to move the needle and move forward. And so I think it's very critical. Like the other states, we're a very small state here. So everybody kind of knows everyone, and there's a lot of overlap. So being in alignment and people really understanding why we're doing what we're doing is critical. So that's why I say it's about the relationships to really move things forward. If I did not have the support of my state board, my legislators, and those specifically on the education committee, and those in the field through other organizations, I would not be able to do what I do.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. Those relationships are central, without question. Other panelists that want to answer this question?
I can jump in, and my response might actually answer one of the questions that just popped up about what are we going to do in the future, given the recent election. And I mean, Manny, we're lucky in Massachusetts to have a lot of supportive leadership in our governor and in our legislators. But that doesn't mean that we don't hear, and we are not immune to the pushback and the skepticism about workforce diversity. So we really talk a lot about the importance of this work as a whole, and the importance of recognizing that we need to prepare all of our students to thrive in an increasingly diverse world. And that means making sure that they have access to different viewpoints, critical perspectives, and that they're building their own cultural competence and socio-political awareness. That's going to be essential for all of them to thrive in an increasingly diverse global society. And that message seems to resonate even in our communities that are not diverse, even in our communities that wonder why this is relevant to them. So that's a lot of the narrative that we're really trying to push out.
My answer would be, I know that some of the other states that they have already included, I always invite my colleagues to talk to the educators, talk to the students who are being directly impacted from the lack of teacher diversity. I hear students, especially, my Spanish speaking students, who you can see struggle, in the classroom because we don't have bilingual teachers, and really understand, like, when you go to make laws, who you are directly impacting. I know I come back to the original question that was asked in our opening is, what was my pathway? Well, the reason why. Those experiences are important. And I don't think like sometimes if you're not in the educator space, you often are visiting for a couple of minutes and you don't still see the whole entire picture. But if you staying directly connected to educators throughout the state, I built a coalition with educators that I go to, even when my own experience as being an educator is not going to be enough, to make sure that, hey, my colleague from this district, I actually talked to a teacher from your district, or here's a student experience of why this legislation is important. And this also goes into the question about moving forward in the significant challenges we're going to see. Those perspectives are important, and it should be, highlighted and really move forward on.
Well, thank you all so much for your engagement. My own brief answer to this question about what do we do, how do we make our districts more inclusive, is we have to stand by our values without question. And then the second part of that is that we have to connect our efforts. We have to make sure that we're talking to the other coalitions that are out there that are leading on the work that's changing districts and the way that they are approaching the work. So with that, this does conclude the time that we had for our panel today. So I want to thank all of our dynamic panelists for the insights that you offered to our network and to folks here that are looking to join our efforts on the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign. This does conclude my role as your moderator. It's been a true pleasure to be able to hear from all of you as trailblazers in your work, and just incredibly grateful to be able to share this space. So to that end, I will turn the floor back to my dear friend, Dr. Stephanie Tomlinson, to close us out, and I will retire.
Thank you all so much again for a wonderful discussion, and thank you to all of our attendees for attending today's webinar. After the webinar ends, you'll see a short feedback survey to share your experience. Please take just 1 to 2 minutes to share your thoughts about the session and how we can continue to make these discussions more relevant and engaging for the field. We also encourage you to consider joining the campaign to stay up to date on our initiatives and gain access to our resources that support educator diversity. It really takes all of us in coalition to do this work, and I wish that you have a wonderful rest of the week and be well. Thank you again for joining us today.